Welcome to another Barb Stamps video. In today's video, we're going to be making this awesome, amazing card for Christmas. And it was inspired by this card that I received in a swap, and I don't know who made it because there was no name anywhere on the card. So if it's your card, thank you so much for your inspiration. I love it and I appreciate it very much. So with my card, we are going to use the Brusho crystal color on the background. I've got some of the white shimmer paint dotted around for some snow. We've got some of our glitter ribbon, and our card colors are balmy blue, basic black, and white. So let me get my supplies and we'll get started. All right, here's the supplies. I've got a 3 3/4 inch by 5 piece of watercolor paper, but we're going to end up cutting that down to 3 1/4 by 4 1/2 after we get it all done. So you just want an extra, a little bit larger piece than you need, so that way you can trim it down to the focal points that you want to show. I have a 1 1/4 inch by, what is this? It doesn't really matter as long as it'll wrap around. This is about 6 inch piece of our cardstock vellum. And then since this is going to end up being 3 1/4 by 4 1/2, this piece is 3 3/8 by 4 5/8. The black layer is 3 3/4 by 5, and then our balmy blue is the 4 1/4 by 11, and I'm just going to fold that in half to make my card base. And we'll just use our bone folder there. Okay, so most of this stuff can go by the wayside while we focus on our watercolor paper piece and our Brusho crystal color. It's been a hot minute since I've used this stuff, but since I wanted to make this card, I got to use it. So we're going to get our work surface prepared. I like to use just a few pieces of our grid paper, and these are kind of like scraps. They've been used in my classes, and I just keep them just for purposes of this, just to protect my work surface when I'm working with Brusho, because it can kind of get all over the place and it sometimes can make a mess. We're going to use the Prussian blue, and I also have a little tray that I've had for ever and ever and ever. So you can't buy them anymore, but I'm sure that you can find some kind of a tray that you can use. So I'm just going to place my watercolor paper in there, and I've got an aqua painter here, and I'm just going to squeeze it until I get some water flowing out of it. And then I'm just going to swirl some water around on this piece of cardstock, and I'm kind of purposely leaving this area right here waterless because I do want some white space. And then I'm going to pull my little push pin out of the top of that, and then I'm just going to sprinkle some of my color around in that kind of U shape that I created with my aqua painter. Next, I've got one of our Stampin' Spritzers here. This one's just filled with water, so I'm just going to kind of spritz this to move this color around a little bit. And then I have another aqua painter here that I use for swirling my Brusho. And I'm just going to kind of swirl that a little bit. Again, leaving this area up here kind of light. And then I'm going to just add a little more water. And then I'm going to bring in a paper towel, and I'm going to kind of dab off some of that excess water. Okay. Now remember, you're going to cut this down. So if it's not exactly the way you want it, you can push the color one way or the other, getting it where you might like it to be when it's dry, and you're going to end up stamping your main image there. So I think I like that. So what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to kind of set this aside to dry, and then I'll clean up my mess, and then I'll be back. Okay, so this isn't the one that I just made. This is the one I just made. This is the one that I made yesterday, and I allowed it to dry. So you need this to dry before you can move on. You can use a heat tool, or you can just let it dry naturally. I just let this dry naturally. So for our next step, I'm going to bring in my Stamparatus, because when I'm stamping with watercolor paper, when you're using watercolor paper, I find that sometimes, because the paper's so porous, you don't always get the perfect image the first time you stamp it. Ooh, nice glare. Sorry about that. We're having some glaring issues here. Okay, so I've got my Stamparatus. Sorry about the glare. I'm going to try to move it around so you can't really see the glare that much. Anyway, when you're using watercolor paper, a lot of times the ink, it doesn't give you the perfect impression the first time. So I like to use the Stamparatus when I'm working with watercolor paper. That way, if I don't get my perfect impression the first time, I can just ink it up and restamp it, and it'll be in the same spot. So I'm using this large cluster of trees. And I'm just going to lay it on my paper where I want. So I kind of want the open area to be at the top of the trees. So I'm going to purposely place my trees about like that. Remember, we're going to cut this down, press that into place, and then I'm going to bring in my memento. Try to use my hand to cover up the glare. Anyway, sorry about that. So I'm using my memento and I'm inking it all up. Okay, and then I'm going to flip that over and I'm going to press and I'm going to stamp it. And you can see right in here and up at the top of the trees, they're not quite as dark as I would like them. Maybe it's fine for someone else, but I want them a little darker. My tree trunks aren't bad, so I'm not really going to ink those up again, but I am going to ink up those trees in the center. Flip that over, and I'm going to press down again, transferring that ink. And that is a lot darker, and that's the look that I'm going for. Keeping my Stamparatus magnets apart because I don't want them to get snapped together and break. And when I'm done using my Stamparatus, I'm just going to bring my Stampin' Chamois in here and just clean that off. Clean off my stamp, and then it's ready to go for my next, because I'm actually doing multiples of this particular card, so I'm going to leave that on there and leave it clean. And so this is what we have now. So we have a nice dark image. It's still a little bit wet, I can see, so I'm going to let that dry while I work on another piece of the card. We'll go ahead and bring in our vellum piece here. And I'm going to actually put that vellum piece on black so that I can actually see the vellum when I'm stamping it. So I'm using the sentiment out of the stamp set that says thinking of you this season. And I'm going to use Stays On because I'm going to be stamping on vellum, and regular ink will not dry on vellum, just like if you're trying to stamp on plastic or glass. Stays On is your go-to ink for those types of paper and materials because it will dry and be permanent. So I'm just going to stamp this kind of right in the center of my vellum strip here. Peel that off. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to let that dry because, again, that's something else that does need to dry. And how's this piece looking? That looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and trim this down. Get that out of the way. Close my ink so I don't stick my fingers in it. Maybe I already have. Nope, looks good. I'm going to bring in my paper trimmer. And I'm going to trim this down to 3 1/4 by 4 1/2. So we're going to place that on the trimmer. And my tree trunks, I want them to be even along the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of use my paper trimmer as a guide to where my trunks are. And then I'll cut that way. So even if I'm cutting on an angle, it's fine. Because I'm just going to use that side then as my... Okay, so then this side's straight. So I'm going to bring this up. And I'm looking for 4 1/2. So I'm going to try to trim off enough so that I get even on both sides. That one. So now we're going for 3 1/4. It looks like my ink is not completely dry yet, so I need to be careful. Okay. And then finally 4 1/2 on this side. Okay, so now I have it 3 1/4 by 4 1/2. Okay, so here's my piece. We're ready for that. Let's check my vellum. It appears to be dry, so I'm just going to, well, first I have to glue this down. So I'm going to bring in my white layer because I just want a little bit of white to pop around the edge of this. And now again, when you're working with watercolor paper, you want to have your adhesive right to the edge, and so I find that liquid glue is the perfect thing for that. Getting your adhesive right to the edge, because watercolor paper, obviously you add water to it, it buckles and bows a little bit, and so that it's not going to lay completely flat, but if you do this, then it will. Alright, so here's our layer of white, and we're just going to have a little bit peeking out on all sides. And we're good. All right, so now we're going to bring this piece over and we're going to add it to the back. So I'm going to throw some glue dots back there, kind of where I think I want my vellum strip to go. And so I think I kind of want it to go about, whoops, like here maybe. We'll go 3. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so you're just going to lay the strip over your paper over your image and get it centered where you think it looks nice. Top to bottom, side to side. I think that looks pretty good. And then just fold it over and press it into those glue dots. And then come back, make sure it's still centered, bring it to that edge, fold it over, and press it into those glue dots. And then just give them a little press so that they're stuck. Okay, so then this layer is going to go onto our layer of black. And I'm just going to pick apart some dimensionals here, and we'll just throw those on the black layer. Again, a reminder, do not throw the edges of your dimensionals away because they are still useful. They're not the perfect size of a dimensional, but it doesn't make any difference. It still works as a dimensional. Peel off all the backings. And then bring this piece over the top and center it. Okay. And then we'll layer that onto our card base. And I'll do that with some more liquid glue. Not being quite so precise about the edges with this because it's not watercolor paper. Get that centered. Use your eyeballs. Mine are not great. Okay, so we've got that down. Then we're going to bring in our white shimmer paint and a stylus tool here. I got this off my Simply Scored tool. So I'm going to shake up my white, what is this, Frost White shimmer paint, and I'm going to end up with shimmer paint in the lid, okay? So I'm just going to take my tool, and I've got the fat end here, and I'm just going to randomly kind of place some dots. Perhaps they look like some snow around my sentiment here. Just for a little bit of added shimmer on this layer. And you can do as much or as little as you want, just reapplying the paint. And if you want, you can come out here onto the trees, simulate some snow falling. However much you want, just like that. And then that's going to dry. It takes a few minutes, so just be careful with it. Let it dry for a few minutes, but we don't have that kind of time. So we're just going to go ahead and move it up here while we finish our last element. And our last element is going to be to tie a knot in this fun black glitter organdy ribbon. Is that what it's called? No, I always call these things the wrong thing. Oh yeah, glittered organdy ribbon. Wow, what do you know? It's a miracle. I got it right. Okay, so I'm just going to tie a knot in the ribbon here. Sometimes you have to manipulate the ends so that they look the same as the other side. Okay. Get my scissors here. And this is a little large. I don't want it quite this big. So we're just going to trim that down just a bit. Okay, and then I'm going to end up sticking that right here on the side of my vellum strip. So I would take a couple of glue dots. Where are they? Here they are. And I would stick one on this edge of the knot, one on this edge of the knot. And then I'm just going to set that right in the middle of the vellum, just like that. And there it is. It's all done. So I appreciate you watching. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it or learned something new. Please subscribe to my channel right down here in the corner. Let you be notified when I upload new videos. And if you need any supplies to create this amazing card, you can get them at shoppingwithbarb.com. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day.